So we're delighted to welcome you all to this evening's lecture with Dr. Elaine Arnull, What Connects the Knife Angel, the Youth Justice Board and the United Nations. We're thrilled to welcome Elaine for her first public lecture with us. The lecture tonight is ahead of the official launch of the Marches Centre of Excellence in Health and Social Care at the University of Wolverhampton's Telford campus. The centre is offering a range of courses which are new to Telford, and Elaine is going to mention them tonight. For those of you who don't know, my name is Paula Harrison and I'm the coordinator of University Centre Telford, and we're the hosts for tonight's lecture. We're part of the University of Wolverhampton and we're based right in the heart of Telford in Shropshire. We'd normally hold our public lecture programme in our centre in Telford, but because of the current pandemic, we've obviously had to move it online. This has been hugely successful. Many of our lectures have attracted a global audience, which has been brilliant. Just a few housekeeping items before I hand over to Elaine. There'll be an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the lecture via the Q&A button. And if you're using a laptop or a desktop, the icon is on the bottom of your screen in the middle. If you're using a mobile, it'll be in the top right-hand corner. The lecture is being recorded, so please can I ask you not to share any personal information in the Q&A. Thank you. So Elaine is Director for the Institute of Community and Society at the University of Wolverhampton. As a centre, we first got to know Elaine and her work when the centre hosted the opening ceremony for the Knife Angel during its visit to Telford in February 2020. Elaine carried out a peer research project on the Knife Angel with the Young People's Forum in Telford, and she's also been involved in the Safer Streets project in Brookside, so she's very well known in Telford. So a very warm welcome, Elaine. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming on such a wonderful and sunny evening. I appreciate your time. So I usually really like to talk and have people talk with me and enter into discussion straight away, but Zoom isn't quite such a good platform for that. So I'm going to talk first, and I'm going to talk for about 40 minutes or so, and then please do ask questions, talk to us, think with us, give us some ideas, tell us what you think we could do differently or how we could interact in the future, because that would just be really interesting, and that's the whole purpose of this evening. So what am I going to talk about? I'm going to talk about what connects the Knife Angel, the Youth Justice Board and the United Nations. And there are three answers, and the simplest one is me, because I've actually worked with them all, and I'm going to talk about some of that this evening. But more seriously, what is at the core and heart of all that work is actually violence, and an interest in violence, and an interest in exploring and examining it and thinking about it with people. And the second one is really that the answer is, whether it's local or national or international, is actually that we all share similar concerns, and it's important to talk to one another about those concerns and about how we think we can solve them and do things differently. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about violence and how we own it and confront it and think about it, because at all levels it's important for us to be able to do that. What would it actually take for us to be able to control violence in all of our lives and in our societies? And what compromises would we actually be prepared to make to do that? And in this period of COVID, in these days of COVID, we all understand what we need to do or have to do to actually mitigate harms. And we've all gone to extreme lengths to mitigate some of those harms from COVID in recent times. So it's something we're already acutely aware of. So if while we're talking, you can be thinking about what would it actually take for us really to seriously minimise and think about violence, I think that might be something that would be interesting to talk about and discuss. So violence is something that intersects all of our lives, whether we think about it or not, in all sorts of ways on a daily basis. And for many of us, it's as simple as watching the news on TV, where a whole range of violent incidents might be reported and might be discussed. And those are violent incidents that are experienced by individuals, by communities, by particular groups and countries. And those perpetrating the violence, those people being violent, can be individuals, they can be communities, they can be particular countries, and they can be particular groups. So violence is something that can occur in all sorts of ways and can be experiences that can occur in various places. We might also experience violence in our homes and in our own community from people we know. And this is the most common experience that we're likely to have. We might also experience violence in a virtual online space, such as the space we're in this evening. And we might not even know who is actually perpetrating that violence against us. And we might have no idea why they're doing that either. Less commonly, there's violence that's experienced in places we do not know and perpetrated by strangers. And it's this violence that actually creates considerable public fear and generates a lot of public interest, a lot of public discussion, but it's actually the violence that is least commonly experienced by us. At the beginning of my career, much earlier on in my career, I worked as a probation officer, and I did that for 8.5 years. And I found that those who experienced violence a lot often crossed over with people who used violence. And much of my academic work and research, and some of the things I'm going to talk about this evening, are actually about that relationship between the experience of violence and being violent or using violence. So what am I really interested in terms of violence? And is that whether you and I have the same understanding of what violence is. Might we actually describe our experiences in the same way and using the same words? And might we consider harms that we ourselves have suffered differently from those that other people experience? And might we consider those harms differently again if they were actually experienced by our children? And for many people, actually thinking about a harm that comes to someone you love is quite different from a harm that may come to somebody that you generically do not know. And when we're working as professionals, whether that's as a probation officer as I was, or as a researcher as I am, and an academic, or when we're professionals who are actually involved in trying to work with and intervene with violence and people who have violent experiences or use violence, we actually try and record those experiences. And working as professionals, do we record those experiences using the same words that the people who use those experiences would, or do we interpret them and use other words about them? And as a society, how much do we really therefore know about what violence is, and how much we all agree on what violence is and what should never ever happen to somebody else? Which things do we think it would be better if they didn't happen, but we accept that they might sometimes happen? So like driving a car, we accept that we may, on occasion, be involved in an accident. We might hope it's only a small accident, but we accept that as the risk of driving. And in terms of violence, are there things that we accept might happen, even though we would prefer they didn't? And how much do we think that we don't mind if that some things happen at all? That's just the way things are. And how much do we actually agree on those things, and how much do we disagree about whether something is a violent behaviour or a violent experience, and whether that's a problem? So things like smacking children is one of the ones that's often a good example of that. Is that a problem? Is it a violent behaviour, or is it something that we think is okay? So these are all questions that I have asked and keep asking. I ask them when I teach, I ask them when I do research, I ask them when I'm working with other people. And they inform the research that I do, and they inform the research that we did on the knife angel, and were part of the reason that we got really interested in and wanted to do some work with people around the Knife Angel when it was coming to Telford and Wrekin. We had those sorts of conversations with the peer researchers in the Knife Angel, and the peer researchers were young people who came to be involved in doing that work with us. And it also, those questions were ones that I often debated and discussed with the Youth Justice Board. They informed the research I did with the young people and the influence I had about how we actually measured programmes around effectiveness, around research, around evaluation, around impact and around change. And questions about violence are ones that actually empower people to think about change. So in terms of thinking about the Knife Angel, about questions about violence, I'm going to talk about this whole range of work and the ways that it's been done. I'm going to talk about working with the UN, and I'm going to talk about how we describe, record, measure and seek to minimise violence and how it affects people and places. The Knife Angel is a state-of-the-art sculpture that tries also to communicate and talk about some of that. It's made from more than 100,000 knives, and many of you may have seen it when you came to Telford, if you came to Telford at that period. In its visually stark and striking representation of violence and its consequences. And like many pieces of art, it really helps us to reflect on and consider violence in a way that jolts our consciousness, because it is actually beautiful, it is actually striking, and yet it also evokes fear in people when they actually think about what they are looking at and witnessing. And there are undoubtedly people in the audience who've been affected by knife violence and knife crime. And I know that Alison Cope, whose son Josh died as a result of knife violence, and who was very instrumental in work around the Knife Angel, is actually in the audience this evening. So welcome, Alison, and thank you for coming and for your work around knife crime, violence and the Knife Angel in particular. And I hope we'll have some conversation today. Importantly, I think the Knife Angel asks us to reflect on some of the critical questions that I started with. What is violence? How do we name it? How do we own it? And how do we own our own relationship to it? Because, for example, most people will undoubtedly tell us that knife carrying is wrong. Most people agree that that's what people answer when asked. But many people actually carry a knife every single day. Most will never pull out or use that knife. The people who carry knives are overwhelmingly men and boys, and that includes many young men who say they do so because it makes them feel safe. So in terms of the Knife Angel, it's actually had very little research attention and very little evaluation of how people feel about it. And that seemed really surprising to me. So when we knew the Knife Angel was coming, we created an opportunity through talking with some other people who are in the audience. Sean Makin, who's a community development worker. I'm not sure if Sarah Durnall's with us this evening as well, another community development worker, and with Paula and other people at Telford University Centre, and actually got together to work with a group of young people from Telford to actually think about knife crime and how we could do some research around the Knife Angel. In order to do that research, we had to train the young people to do peer research. We had to help them to understand what peer research was and is. We had to get ethics approval and explain to the young people what ethics approval was. And we had to undertake training with young people. So they gave a lot of their time to being involved in this project. We also then undertook data collection with them, and this was all happening just as COVID was on the horizon. So in fact, the Knife Angel, only one of the first sets of taking research, collecting data occurred, because after that the country went into lockdown in March over a year ago, not this March. In order to collect the data, we had to create a questionnaire with the young people, and then those young people actually undertook the research on the streets, right outside, right by the Knife Angel, and stopped people and asked them would they be prepared to take part. And they were supported by Sean and Sarah, and by Mak Ashraf from the university, from Mahua Kanjalal, who's also involved in this research, by a whole raft of people who helped to give their time. And the responses that people from Telford, who gave us their time and their thoughts, gave us, collected some of them on here. And we actually took those questionnaires that people had filled in with young people, and we turned them into some analysis. And what people said was that 96% of people who responded agreed that they thought Knife Angel actually helped to raise awareness about knife crime. Most of them thought that it helped think about violence in society. In fact, that was an overwhelming response, as you'll see. And they also told us things like it actually really made you understand and think about the damage that knife violence caused. It made you think about the fact that every knife had a story behind it. And that although some people didn't feel particularly unsafe, they were aware that there was always the chance someone was carrying crime. And very particularly, people said that they thought Telford was a place where knife crime happened, and that although people did in general feel safe in their neighbourhood, they didn't always. And they also thought that knife crime was related to other things. What the young people also said to us when we shared the data back with them, and we did all have to do this work virtually in the end, was that they were really shocked by some of the findings from the Knife Angel. And they wanted to think about how they communicated those findings more generally, rather than just in the report that we wrote together. So they actually created a social media campaign, and they released facts of the day about knife crime. So how 40 out of the 49 people who'd said, talked about whether Telford was a place where knife crime happened, 73% of them felt safe in their own neighbourhood, but not necessarily in other parts. And all of those sorts of things that people said that community and family were the biggest feelings of safety they had in their own neighbourhood. So important and interesting findings and things to think about. And what really happened as the result of the young people sharing this was that this research got lots of coverage and lots of shares in Telford, and also helped people to think about research and how people could get involved in their own communities in doing research. And that's something I'm going to talk about later, is how we're continuing to try and do that with people. You can actually see one of the peer researchers talk about the research with us on our University of Wolverhampton social work YouTube channel, and I've got the link to that at the end if any of you want to have a look at that. Something we didn't explore in terms of the Knife Angel was the relationship that violence has to sex and gender. And yet this relationship is actually a really strong one and an important one, and I touched on that in terms of talking about knife crime. In the UK, as we know, many women and girls think that their voices aren't being taken into account in the construction of violence, in the way it impacts and entails their lives. And this particularly came to the fore recently following the death of Sarah Everard, and the vigils and the campaigns that have occurred subsequently. What people are asking to do, and the government has a call out for evidence that's just closed to think about violence, and particularly the way it impacts women and girls, is that it means that policy and interventions to mitigate violence are missing that vital gender perspective if women and girls think their voices aren't being heard. And in my work, some of the girls who talk about being violent and experiencing violence give examples that are really quite extreme. But they also describe how their lives are curtailed by acts of violence, the threats of violence, and the ways they seek to mitigate against the risk of physical and sexual violence and the abuse of power by those people in authority. When you actually try to access a picture of a powerful woman, so if you want to talk about empowering and how do you talk about how women use power, this is the picture that comes up most frequently. It's Rosie the Riveter, as many of you will know, and it's an image that actually was used in the Second World War to promote women working in industry. So it was trying to promote this idea of women being powerful. And it's an image that actually has caught attention and has been copied internationally a great deal. In fact, if you search it online, you'll find pictures of Beyonce posed in this image alongside lots of other celebrities. And the other image after Rosie the Riveter that's the most common if you ask for images of powerful women, are Beyonce, Madonna, Angela Merkel, and then Malala Yousafzai. But all of those images don't come for free. But when I went to the UN, I did actually take a photograph of the words of Malala from when she actually spoke at the UN in 2013. And as many of you will know, Malala is a woman who, as a young girl, experienced extreme organised violence that was intended to frighten those who believed in permitting access to education for women. So just simple things sometimes, like actually accessing education, can result in extreme levels of violence against particular groups and particularly against girls and women. But what she talks about in those words you will see now is the power of education and how one child, one teacher, one book and one pen can change the world. And they're very powerful words, and words that resonate clearly for her because she has experienced the power of those things. So I guess what I wanted to think about was, how do we talk about empowering girls and women in the family, outside of the family, and in communities, if it's so difficult to access images of girls and women with power, everyday, ordinary power? And this brings me to some of the work that I did for the Youth Justice Board. And I've summarised some of that to the side for you. I did a lot of work for the Youth Justice Board, both undertaking very large scale research projects and then later on working with them as an advisor and thinking about how research can actually be used to create much more effective practice. And currently I also do that work for the Probation Service and for the Ministry of Justice. So in my research work for the Youth Justice Board, I was involved with girls and boys and thinking about how young people who were justice involved, how their lives were impacted by a whole range of other needs and experiences, whether that was housing and the access to housing and homelessness, whether they were young people who committed multiple offences within the space of a year, whether they were young people in prison, and then undertaking the largest and most comprehensive study on girls to date in the UK, England and Wales actually. And in that study, girls talked about violence, and it was the beginning at that time of violence becoming the most common offence that girls would be involved in the youth justice system for and imprisoned for, and it was a trend that has continued, even though numbers of young people in the youth justice system have fallen substantially. So although violence is mainly used by men and boys for a variety of reasons, girls and women use violence too. Men and boys use violence most against women and girls and other men and boys, and they use it against their family and their friends and communities. And girls do the same. But men and boys are more likely to use violence that is much more serious, and that's why you'll see a difference in sentencing patterns. And they're more likely to use lethal violence, i.e. kill somebody. And they're much more likely to use a weapon, which again takes us back to the knife angel. So this doesn't mean that girls and women aren't violent and don't use violence. And my research has looked very specifically, again, at how girls describe violence and how they use violence and why. And what that has shown is that girls will often describe using violence because they would say that they're standing up for themselves. And the girls that I talked to, who are drawn from across England, all of whom involve the youth justice system, talked about how they'd actually been taught by their families and their communities to use and value the use of violence, and that was as a mechanism for self and family protection. They described how the ability to protect and stand up for themselves was critical within their particular communities, and that the use of violence wasn't gendered. So it didn't make them less of a girl or a woman to be violent. It was an integral part of standing up for yourself as a girl or a woman. Their evidence was that the ability to use violence, therefore, was not only not gendered, but that it was instrumental for girls and women. And that whereas male violence might be more about establishing power and control over others, particularly girls and women, girls in the youth justice system were more likely to describe their violence, as I say, about being standing up for themselves. Again, it was usually less serious and much less likely to involve a weapon. And that again brings us back to this concept of the knife angel and the use of weapons. What are the sorts of mechanisms that determine how we use violence and experience violence? And how do we understand those relationships such that we can make a change to those things? Because they're actually critical within our society and within our communities. They affect schools, relationships between peers, teenage dating relationships, and then relationships with family and others. That piece of research is actually published in a journal article called Being a Girl Who Gets Into Trouble, and the link to it is at the end. So that's something else that interests me. What is the relationship between violence and sex and gender, and how do we actually talk about it and understand it more? Because also, if girls and women use violence less than boys and men, what can we actually learn from girls and women about mitigating violence in our lives? And that brings me to the United Nations. So this is a picture from 2019, when I actually managed to go to the United Nations and take part in the Commission on the Status of Women. And this is a picture from inside the UN, and it was a really exciting thing to do. Very exciting, very privileged, actually mixing with people from all over the world who are there to talk about key issues related to the experiences of girls and women, about education, about violence, about climate change, about anything and everything that affects our lives. The research I was there to talk about was actually about how we empower girls and women within the home and family settings, and how we use programs to be able to do that. And this picture is another picture of me there. I'm actually wearing a t-shirt, I don't know if you can see it, that says "Courage calls to courage everywhere." And that's a saying from Emily Pankhurst, a suffragette. And I'm standing with Rob Street, who is actually now is the director of the Observatory for Family Justice at the Nuffield Foundation. But actually I knew from a previous life working for the Youth Justice Board, and I worked with him around advising around research and its impact. And Rob's organisation, the Nuffield Foundation, actually sponsored a lot of the dissemination of the work from the UN and the Empowering Women and Girls speeches. And he also came along and spoke about how do you construct policy and interventions and fund that through research that actually will make a difference and empower women and girls' lives, and so make the lives of men and boys better, because they will behave less violently as well and experience less violence by inflicting less violence. So at this setting, we actually talked about violence against women around the globe, and we had people from all over the world talking to us. One panel at the 65th Commission, which was this year, which was virtual, so much less exciting, looked at responses of professionals from people working with domestic violence and abuse and working together. And that looked at how do we take ideas from other parts of the world, in this case Argentina, and apply it elsewhere. And that research in the UK is led by me, and I'm working with Mahua Kanjalal and Jackie Sabir, who is the Assistant Chief Constable of Police for Bedfordshire and the National Policing Lead for Serious Violence. And I think Jackie is also with us this evening. And that research builds on the work of Professor Kerry Carrington in Australia and Professor Myrna Dawson in Canada. And we looked at that panel about how could we actually take those ideas about multi-agency working and intervene more effectively, because we've had multi-agency working around particularly domestic violence and abuse in the UK for a long time. We've had things like MARACs for about 10 years. What we haven't seen is a change in the number of women who die every year. And that's what we need to get to, because that also means there is someone going to prison for having murdered that person, and a family that is in very serious distress and concern and upset with lifelong impacts. In order to advance some of that work, I'm also leading some work currently across the West Midlands, and really happy to always talk to people about it, which is called Public and Care Services, Working with Families and Violence, a Regional Approach. And we're actually looking to try and map how interventions occur, how we intervene, and how we do so more effectively across organisations. And finally, at the UN, we also did another piece on the impact of COVID-19 on those delivering domestic violence interventions. And again, I did that work with Mahua Kanjalal and with Susie Hawkes. And we also delivered that work with another organisation who were involved with the 63rd Commission, which is Living with Abuse, and their Chief Exec, Debbie Hughes. And we've worked with them a long time now, thinking about how we talk about violence, how we describe violence, what work we do with it as professionals, and how we begin to pull things together. The research we did on COVID actually showed that to date, particular forms of coercive violence have really manifested themselves during this period of lockdown. And that people who perpetrate violence have particularly utilised the opportunities that the virus has given them to further contain the person that they're seeking to control. Containment has increased, therefore, alongside the loss of freedoms, such as being able to meet others in informal settings, maybe just other parents at the school gates, or actually going to access health treatment. And when you read some of these stories, it's actually really shocking how imprisoned some people are in their own homes and by their own families. The outcome for men and women experiencing domestic violence and abuse has therefore been an increase in the physical and mental health impacts of violence. And future policies aimed at mitigating epidemics should really take account of the way that violence against women and girls in particular has increased during this period, and then the subsequent increased levels of vicarious trauma that's experienced by the people who are seeking to intervene and help them. Because actually listening to really dreadful stories day in and out, day out of people and trying to work out how to help them at a distance is actually incredibly stressful, as I'm sure you can all imagine. So the focus, whether at the Knife Angel, whether at the UN or whether at the Youth Justice Board, is always slightly different, but overwhelmingly it's about how do we empower and support people to effectively address and challenge the violence they experience. And there are many ways we can do this. And there are answers that, such as practitioners working more effectively together and calling for policy change. I've done other work more recently on mothers' experiences when they experience domestic violence and then experience the forced removal of their children by social workers as a result of simply being the victim of domestic violence. And in that paper, I've actually called for a review of social work practice and policy and the way we work with people. And again, a link to that paper, which has a really long, not snappy title called Developing a Theoretical Framework, is again at the link to that is at the end of this paper. So what I suggest is that the answer about change is in our hands. The answer involves properly funding services that address violence and support those who experience it. And it involves all of us challenging those who use violence. And I think this really brings us back to the beginning and to thinking about the answers to those questions. And we need to begin to think quite radically. This is a picture I have always, a statue I've always loved. I saw it many, many years ago in Sweden for the first time, and it now sits in the UN grounds. And it talks about how we mitigate another weapon used to kill many people in all sorts of ways. How do we actually work together to bring about change so that violence is used less? How do we make it so that particularly young men and boys do not want or feel a need to carry a knife in order to feel safe, particularly from other men and boys? How do we support people to live in families where violence is never used and where they do not feel like it's an acceptable way to settle an argument or establish control over one another? How do we create a world where using violence doesn't feel like a way to gain respect for girls and young women, or for men and boys? And how do we communicate that we're standing up for ourselves without being violent? Finding the solutions involves each of us in an open and honest conversation about what violence is, about what levels of violence we do or do not consider acceptable, and how much support we want to give to people experiencing violence. How much help do we want to give to people who use violence so that they can change? And what are the limits to the use of violence we're actually prepared to put in place? And how radical are those suggestions that we're prepared to think about? We have lots and lots of work going on at the university, and we're doing our real best to be part of the process of this conversation within Telford and Wrekin and across the Black Country and across the West Midlands region. We're doing our best to help put in place the opportunities for the discussions like this one and learning and thinking about these things. And we're doing our best to actually put your work and our work on the map by talking about it at local forums, at regional forums, at national forums and at international forums, like I just talked about. We're working closely with community development team in Telford and Wrekin and colleagues across the public services and policing. And we've got projects running and underway with Jazz Badisha in terms of community engagement and the Safer Streets projects on Brookside, for example. And we're recruiting community researchers. So it uses a peer research idea, but it's not with younger people. It's with any member of the community who wants to be trained to undertake research and do some research with us about feeling safe in your community. And we want to think about how Safer Streets projects can make a difference. So please do connect with Steve Poole, who is the member of the community development team who is leading that research, or drop me a line. I'm really interested to talk to you about it. We're also working with the Lloyds Bank Foundation and Harriet Balance and her colleagues in Telford and Wrekin, and doing work with people to think about how do you actually build in Telford and Wrekin support mechanisms and the resilience to solve future problems, whether that's COVID or whether it's issues of violence or whether it's issues of poverty or helping your neighbour. And we're also developing a whole range of teaching and learning programmes, as Paula spoke about at the beginning, that actually covers social work qualifying training at undergraduate and postgraduate level. And we're always really happy to talk about those things. And we already teach the master's teaching out of the Priorslee campus. We also teach a large social care undergraduate programme. It's a very large programme, and it actually provides people with the skills and the knowledge to become a leader in transforming social care. And we've really revised the programme in recent times to really develop those skills that people have told us they need people to have within the community and within social care. We're also on that programme, you can join it from a foundation level if you've had less traditional educational experience. And that's a really positive, nurturing way of actually thinking about how do you engage with the university? How do you go back to learning if you're an older learner? What skills do you need and how do you get them? We've also got some really exciting brand new programmes coming on the stream, and they're undergraduate programmes in community development and youth work. And they're going to be taught out of the exciting new Centre of Excellence at Priorslee, which looks gorgeous. I've only seen it online, I haven't seen it in person yet. And we also have a really innovative housing and social care BA that will be the first in the country, and turned out to be very, very timely for us because we also have the Ministry of Housing moving into Wolverhampton, so not very far away. And we hope that we'll be able to get lots of input with them there. And lastly, we've got a brand new master's programme in social work and social care professional development that aims to pick up on the whole range of things that people have told us they need to think about and be able to do. Like all of our programmes and existing ones, we're always reviewing them. We're always looking to develop and deliver programmes that actually deliver what you need in your communities, from employees, what you want to learn, what you'd like your children to know about and learn, all of those sorts of things. I've posted the link to the social work webinar series that you'll see at the top there, and the link to the YouTube accounts where past seminars can be accessed. And we've done all sorts of things in recent times in terms of Black History Month, in terms of biracial identity, in terms of working with Roma communities, and in terms of domestic violence. And we've got a whole series of programmes coming up, including the chief social worker in the country is coming to speak. We also have a research seminar series and a series of podcasts. And what we want is for our teaching and learning and the research to be really accessible. And we want people to be able to tell us what they need and what they think about and what they want to talk about. So with all of those things and with all of these things in terms of this, the ask is, what do you and your children and your friends and your family want? What do you require in the education or the research or the teaching and learning or the public lectures that we give? And how can we collaborate with you? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elaine. It was absolutely fascinating, really insightful. We've got a couple of messages from Maria. She said, very thought-provoking. I run a 2-day course with my job at West Mercia Police called Empower. It's with young people across Shropshire who are close to exclusion from education and may be involved in teen abuse, CSE, county lines, knife crime, etc. These young people are from all walks of life. Many partner agencies also come when able to. We've had lots of positive feedback from parents, schools and youths, and we would love to be included in any other projects and also to learn from you.
I'd love to. Delighted to talk.
Okay, that's lovely. So, Maria.
I mean, sorry, Paula, I was just going to say, when we did the Knife Angel research, the police were also involved in running the training up in the centre, weren't they? I didn't know.
Yeah, the steer clear.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I think that's probably, we're going to continue that once we're back in the centre. So yes. So
the days when we could all meet up.
When life was so easy. So yes, I can put Maria in touch with you, Elaine.
Thank you.
That's okay. Thank you, that's lovely. From somebody else, what on earth can we do? It's so sad. I work in youth custody. We have children coming in with knife wounds and horrific scars. Carrying knives also continues in youth custody, unfortunately. It can be tragic not only for the victim, but for the alleged offender. We so need to talk about violence, otherwise it will continue to rise.
No, I absolutely agree with you. I think unless we can really talk about violence, unless we can actually have quite honest conversations, because people do have different views about what they think is an acceptable level of violence. It's not actually acceptable for me, for anyone to be violent to me or to have any violent experience, but people do have different views. Some people think that there is a range, or as I say, that sometimes that's the only way to communicate standing up for yourself, or men and boys particularly will think that if they don't carry a knife, they're going to be a victim, therefore they need to carry a knife. And actually how we think about how we change those ideas and those thoughts, because what we always say is, well, of course everyone thinks that was wrong, but that's not necessarily the case. And I think unless we talk about it quite openly and get some levels of understanding and agreement with one another and say, well, actually these are the parameters, because at the moment we say these are parameters, but actually if lots and lots of people are not sticking with those parameters, then actually it's not really a message that's getting through or getting heard. And I really agree with you that the people who behave violently also have dreadful outcomes. Being in a youth justice detention centre is nowhere that anyone wants to be, and doesn't have good outcomes, as we know, for the young people who go there. So it's dreadful for the families and the people who are affected by violence. And many of those young people who are in, we did the persistent young offenders work, which is the one where I talked about how often people commit offences during a year, which was really frequent. The backgrounds of those children, because we actually looked at all of their backgrounds of social services involvement and all of their files, were really backgrounds of lots of deprivation, lots of negative experiences, lots of traumatic experiences, lots of loss and death, poverty, all sorts of things. And so actually they weren't young people who'd just decided to be violent very often. They were young people who thought it was a solution to some other problem they thought they were facing. So yeah, I think we really do need to have those quite honest conversations, and I'm not sure that we always do.
Thank you, Elaine. Kath Laflay says, thanks for a really interesting and thought-provoking lecture, Elaine. The peer research model is brilliant and it's definitely making me think about how I might use this approach in my own research. So thank you very much from Kath. Karen asks, will we receive the slides? And the answer is that we will be uploading the recordings to various places. Elaine mentioned the Wolverhampton University Social Work YouTube channel. So the recording will be uploaded onto there, and also our own University Centre Telford YouTube channel. We will edit the recording and post the recording on there so you can watch it again. And then I'm just looking in the chat because I think Maria's colleague Deb Wheeler said she'd also like to be included in any further projects with Maria. We'll get in touch with Deb as well. Sonia says, how young do you think anti-violence education should start?
I think it could be as young as we want it to be. You know, we'll see. One of the things that really started us to think about how professionals recorded and talked about violence was a project we did. I talked about Living with Abuse, who are an organisation we've worked with in Leicestershire for a long time now, and it's when I was at my previous university. And one of the things, we were actually working with them on a project where young people, children, were referred for being violent to their parent, generally their mother. And we started to look at the data that they'd, you know, all of the records they kept, everything they recorded. And one of them that really started me to think was a referral for a child of 3. And it said that this child of 3, what was recorded was smack's mother. And I was a bit nonplussed by it, because I thought, well, I thought every 3-year-old smacked its mother. You know, isn't that what little children do? So clearly they weren't referring that child because it smacked its mother. They were referring the child for something else, but that wasn't what they recorded. So as part of that project, we did a lot of work with, we did it with 4 groups, focus groups of women who'd gone through the Freedom Programme, or versions of the Freedom Programme. So women who'd experienced violence in the home and whose children were also violent to them on some occasions. And then we did a project where we brought all of the professionals who worked in the region together, and we asked them to talk about what was violent behaviour for a child, what was violent behaviour for a young person, like an adolescent, and what was violent behaviour for an adult. And we did quite a lot of work on what age groups they thought was there and what sorts of behaviours they thought people did. And then we asked them to talk about things like smacking. So what is a smack? What does it mean? What does someone actually do? Where would you experience that if you were smacked? What would that feel like? And we went through all of those sorts of things. And out of that, it became really interesting discussions about the way violence is used. So women who experience violence will often describe a smack across the face. So as something a man does to a woman when they want to disrespect them. It's not serious violence, they didn't describe it as, it's something that's about disrespect. And it was really interesting what people thought particular behaviours actually accounted for. The group of people who couldn't do that work, who found it really, really difficult, were professionals. And they're the people who are writing down and recording what's happened, what interventions then need to happen, and whether there's any progress or change. And if we're not accurate in what we record, if we can't describe it openly, if it makes us feel too uncomfortable or we find it really hard to do, we actually can't bring about that change. So I think if we could get all children, all people thinking about what is violent behaviour, and is it ever acceptable to behave like that? And what if you do behave like that, how do you come back from that? How do you learn not to do that next time? I don't think we can really bring about change. So I guess I'd say it's never too young, really. Not if they're verbal. And I guess if people aren't verbal, there may be other ways to do it. But yeah. Does that answer it?
Yes, yeah, certainly. Thank you, Elaine. And just a comment from somebody, she says, I'm about to start as a volunteer with the Youth Justice Service at West Mercia. Recently moved back to the UK after 17 years in Hong Kong. So this has been really useful as background, and I'm going to read more widely around the topic. Thank you so much. That's really.
And I imagine that will be fascinating, actually, having come back from Hong Kong.
Yes, that's right. And another comment from Karen. True, we have cases where a child has never been in trouble before and then has been charged with murder for a mistake made. Thank you for this opportunity. It is really great that this is being discussed. So that's brilliant. And then Mary says, if violence forms part of some people's lives as normal, how can we ever expect social change towards less violence, as it will involve reprogramming whole communities? This feels unachievable.
very, very positive of you, Mary. I think it's, for many of us, we don't live lives where violence happens a lot to us. We're very fortunate, we're very lucky. And there are some people who live lives where violence happens all the time and it's part of their everyday experience. And that's really, really sad. But I think for many of us, we ignore or we allow violence to happen to others or in different places because it isn't happening to us. And so I think unless we all become part of that conversation and we all think about why is it that some people need or feel they need to behave violently or put themselves in a position like carrying a knife where they could behave violently and the outcome would be really dreadful. And unless we can actually think about why is it that young men and boys feel like that, because there would be, you get lots of bravado speech, and I'm sure from hearing what the audience is experiences, many people have heard the bravado speech about well, I would do this if such and such did X and whatever. But actually most people don't actually want to kill somebody. They don't want to really hurt someone. They don't want, I've worked with plenty of men who've used violence a lot in the past and been quite scarred by that experience and what they did to people, and actually find it very difficult to leave in the past and to change, because they will see people in the street that they've been violent to. I used to work with someone who had a sort of calling card which was to scar people's faces, and he would meet people when he was older that he had done that to. And actually, you may think, well, I feel more sorry for the person who's had their face scarred than I do for the person who did it. But actually learning to change when you're the person who's behaved like that is really hard. So I guess that's why I think, I've met so many people who change that I think change is possible. And I've met so many people who have really negative experiences but can talk about them really openly and honestly, and that's why I think the rest of us need to be as brave as they often are, because actually that's what will make a difference, is actually naming it, saying it, owning it, accepting that there are things we would all rather we hadn't done at some point in our lives, but it doesn't define us or describe us. And
a couple of comments just coming in. So a couple more thank yous, and then Karen has said that she's worked in Australia in the youth justice system, so she's happy to discuss further if felt necessary.
I'd love to.
So, that's brilliant. So thank you ever so much to everybody for their attendance and their comments and your comments, and we look forward obviously to taking some of these discussions further, and I'll be in touch with various people.
Thank you. And thank you, Paula. Thank you for hosting it and for inviting me.
You're very welcome. That was brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Elaine. And a few more thank yous coming in before we say goodbye to everybody. So thank you very much, and goodbye everybody, and look forward to seeing you all again soon.
Goodbye, and I hope there's some sunshine out there still.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.